I talked about finding diamonds, but you knew about this man for some time.
I was frightened you were going to ask me how well I knew him.
You don't look that old, Dave. Mind you, he died in the 50s. I thought you may have caught up with him.
No, quite an amazing man. A number of firsts he had in Australia and New Zealand, some of which still not equalled, even in Australia, for a New Zealand jockey. And then what he did in England. And the thing about England at the time he was riding there was that it was the epitome of world racing. They had the best American jockeys there, about 4 or 5 top American jockeys, Australian jockeys, top Irish jockeys. Very difficult situation for anyone to make a presence, and he did.
I was going to say, he changed the riding style, didn't he? But he adopted that style that we saw in America.
Yes, it was first reported in Ashburton in about 1899 or something, and he rode 3 winners, which was great, but he also fell off after the finish a couple of times. But that wasn't mentioned so much, and it was always a difficult style to master, especially in those days. But I would say that I'd like to thank the Hall of Fame Academy here, Steve, because we have our heroes of horsemen and horses in our lifetimes, and sometimes it's easy to overlook that previous lifetimes they had their heroes too.
Well, that's right. We've got to look back to go forward, don't we?
Well, that's right. And he was an amazing man in many ways, and not many people become the leading rider for the #1 stable in New Zealand, especially in those days, after only a couple of years riding. Very talented man.
Very talented. Not overly big, but fitness was his key.
That was it. He was 5'2". They called him the Pocket Hercules. He's probably the first jockey ever in New Zealand to have in Christchurch where he lived in his earlier days, he had his own gymnasium. He was a fitness freak. He part-owned a pacer called Ribbonwood, who's the Lazarus of his time, and a man of many parts.
Man of many parts. Now you're starter for 10. This is like University Challenge. Avondale Jockey Club, he caused a strike.
Yeah, and once more he's a man before his time because it was over jockey safety, which in those days was hardly considered at all by owners and trainers. And he considered the jockey situation, the conditions weren't safe for riders to be out there in the races. And typical of racing administration of the day, they said, all right, so they put apprentices on for the last 2 races. They had to take the risk.
We used to go to races on those days.
But to be fair, the man who backed him up was Jack O'Shea, who was Desert Gold's rider. So it wasn't just a industrial sort of protest. There was more to it than that. He's probably ahead of his time, safety, if you look at it now.
Certainly was, and to consider that he rode in 9 different countries, even latter day, modern day jockeys don't do that.
And never got on an aeroplane. And just to underline what big time was in those days, one of his biggest wins over there was Lally on the Royal Hunt Cup, and it was raced by the Druids Lodge, who were the biggest punters probably ever in the history of racing. And a book was produced in the 90s where they transferred the value of the money from Victorian eras to modern times. And on one day in the days leading up to that race, he was back to win $1 million. Now the pressure on that, pretty enormous.
But he got it done.
He got it done, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dave McCarthy will be joining Peter Williams at the next University Challenge. Your topic, Tod Hewitt.